Section 33 of Library Essays. Papers related to the work of public libraries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. Library Essays. Papers related to the work of public libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick. Popularizing Music Through the Library, Part 2. In the first place, the librarian would wish to see that all the members of his community were able to understand the language of his books, if not to read it. To remember our analogy for a moment, he would practically fit his books to his people. If they were predominantly French, for instance, he would buy many French books. But one cannot do this with music, for music is a language by itself, for the most part untranslatable into any other. We must assume that in the world to which our imaginary community belongs, there is but one language, and that to understand the books, those who do not know that language must be taught it. School instruction in language is largely limited to reading. Children who go to school understand and talk their language already, having been taught it at home. It is to the homes, therefore, that the librarian would have to look for this instruction, and he would have to bring to bear on parents whatever influence might be at his disposal to make them see its value and uses. Secondly, he would have to see that as many as possible were taught to read the language. This would be the function of the schools. Thirdly, it would be necessary to see that facility in reading proceeded so far that readers would not find it necessary to read aloud, but could, when they desired, read rapidly to themselves. It would be necessary, of course, to show many of the teachers and almost all of their pupils that reading is primarily not to enable the reader to recite to others, but to make an impression on his own mental equipment. It is quite possible for one to learn to read out loud after a fashion in a foreign tongue, without understanding a word of it, but so that listeners may get a fair idea of it. The effect on the reader in this case is absolutely zero. Musically, this kind of community is precisely the one that public libraries have to deal with. Many of our clients do not like or understand music at all, or they care only for the most elementary melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, comparable to the literature that one gets in a child's primer. Of those whose range of appreciation and love is fairly wide, comparatively few are familiar with musical notation and cannot read music. Of those who can read, few can read rapidly and with assurance, and fewer still can read without audible utterance, that is, they cannot read to themselves. It is common to hear persons who can sing or play on some instrument with a fair degree of success and taste say, "Oh, I can't read. I have to pick out the notes and get my teacher to help me." This is exactly as if someone who had just recited an oration or a poem with some feeling should proclaim complacently, "Oh, I can't really read. I had to pick out that piece word for word with my teacher at my elbow to help me out." In the face of such a situation, the librarian should feel and act precisely as he would feel and act if the situation existed with regard to books, as it has already been imagined and described. First, he should try to influence the growth of musical appreciation through the home, so that all the children in the family should come to understand and use musical language as they do the language of the spoken word. Secondly, he should try to influence the schools, so that they shall teach the reading of musical notation as thoroughly as they do the reading of the printed word, and to persuade teachers of music to teach music really, and not simply the art of performing on some musical instrument. Thirdly, he shall point out to his musical clients that music may be read to oneself, just as language can, and encourage them to try it, beginning with easy examples. Note that reading to oneself can be done only by those who already know how to read aloud, and only by practice. There is no way in which it can be taught. Fourthly, he should have in his library a selection of music picked out to a great extent to further the ends outlined above. Much of it should be for readers, not for performers. His list should be made for readers, and the comments on individual titles should be for readers. Moreover, there should at present be such as will help the beginner, for a very large proportion of our musical readers are beginners, although they may be in the anomalous position of the reader who knows and appreciates the subject matter very thoroughly, while he can read about it only hesitatingly and haltingly. Imagine a well-informed and intelligent student of history who has completely forgotten to read, owing to some concussion of the brain which has not impaired his knowledge in any other way, and you have the situation of many music lovers. There were doubtless poets before the invention of alphabets, and one may appreciate a symphony concert without knowing his musical alphabet or being able to use it. But we are accustomed now to considering thorough ability to read as a prerequisite to the requirement of a general education. And I do not see why, as complete an ability to read music should not be a prerequisite for such a musical education as all persons ought to possess. The analogy between the reading of music and that of language is very close, as we have seen, and we may be guided by it largely, but there is one respect in which it fails. Music and poetry may both be bad in the sense that they are ugly, of faulty construction, or trivial. But poetry may also be bad because it conveys a bad moral lesson, or causes one to accept what is false. I cannot see that it is possible for music to do this, except by association. A tune that has always been associated with improper words may in time come to be considered as itself improper, but there can be nothing objectionable about the music in itself. Again, music may be improperly used. Anyone would say that a largo in a minor key was out of place at a wedding, or a jig at a funeral. Association may have, but does not necessarily have anything to do with this. But here again, the music in itself is not objectionable. This simplifies the selection of music for a library, for it excludes at the outset almost all the problems of censorship. Music is rejected usually for negative reasons, because it is not worth buying, not for any act of evil influence that it is likely to exert. The question comes up especially in connection with certain adjuncts to a music collection, pianola rolls and phonograph records. These are both of great aid in assisting the public to understand the language of music, which they must do before they learn to read it. They may be profitably used, of course, in connection with reading, and yet the pleasure of following a piano player or a phonograph with the printer's score seems to be known to few. Every library must judge for itself whether it can afford to put money into these adjuncts, but in most cases it is unnecessary to do so, it being easy to get the rolls and records by donation. In doing this at my own library, I have been struck with the trivial or the so-called popular character of most of the rolls received. I am told, also, that those who borrow them, and they have gone out like hotcakes, are largely persons who have not visited the library before. I believe that this sort of music is popular, not because it is trivial or trashy, but because it is easy to understand. There is some music that is both good and easy to understand and easy to read. Schumann's Album for the Young will occur to anyone. The compositions of Ludwig Schitt are modern examples. But the general impression that good music is difficult both to read and appreciate is highbrow, in fact, and that easy music is always trivial and poor, is a deduction, I am afraid, from experience. It is certainly not in the nature of things. However, so long as we want easy music, both to hear and to read, and a good deal of it is trashy, I can see nothing to do but use the trashy music. With the music rolls, triviality is all we have to object to, the ceaseless repetition of the same phrases and harmonies. We must remember, however, that these are not boresome to the beginner. It takes a good deal of repetition to make one tired of a musical phrase, and there is absolutely no question of active badness here, only of worthlessness. When we come to phonograph records, however, we encounter something different. As far as these are purely musical, what has been said of the music rolls applies to them also. But many of them are vocal, and the words are often far below library standard. When a record is rejected for its words, the music, of course, must go with it, though as music it may be quite unexceptionable. The location of the music collection is affected by the purpose for which it is maintained. A collection for scholars alone should certainly be in a separate room with an expert custodian, but when we regard the collection as a means of popularizing music and of improving popular musical taste, the matter takes on another aspect. A person who comes to the library for the purpose of visiting the music room will find it, no matter where it may be. But the reader who needs to have his attention called to it, or in whose case it must compete for use with other books, will never do so. Going back to our analogy with general literature, we may note that when a librarian wishes to promote the circulation of some special class of literature, or call attention to some particular book or books, the last thing he would think of doing would be to set them apart in a special room. What he does do is to place them conspicuously in the most frequented spot in his library. This is, of course, only one side of the question. No one can browse on a collection of books unless he knows how to read. And so long as music readers cannot read to themselves, the reading of instrumental pieces cannot be done without the aid of the actual instrument. Even when one can read music to himself well enough to pick out what he wants, it may aid him to be able to perform the piece on the instrument for which it was written. Now, the most frequented spot in the library, where I recommend that the music collection should be displayed, is not the place for a piano or for its use. This must necessarily be in a separate room. These are not, however, absolutely irreconcilable requirements. It is not necessary that the music and the instrument should be in the same room. A soundproof or a distantly located room for the instruments may be used by those who wish to perform pieces before selecting them, even if no music at all is shelved in the room. This room should preferably be as near as possible to the music shelves, and if it is, it must of course be soundproof. Going back again for a moment to our analogy, the provision of a soundproof music room corresponds to the creation of a similar room for the ordinary reader, where he may take his books and read them aloud to see how they sound. The mere statement shows us how far behind our ability to read language is our ability to read music. When I first began to present these ideas, which seemed to me to be absurdly self-evident, it was gradually borne in upon me that most people considered them new and strange, both those who agreed with me and those who disagreed. But without going into the question of what music can and cannot convey to the human mind, it seems clear to me that both music and language succeed in conveying something to the human organism, and do it principally by sound waves. In the case of both, there is a way of writing down what is to be conveyed, so that the record may be used by another person who wishes to convey it by sound, or so that a person sufficiently skilled may convey it to himself without making an audible sound. These facts seem to me to establish so complete an analogy that we may treat music in a library precisely as we treat ordinary books, both in selection, distribution, and use. If to complete the analogy we must insist on certain changes in the attitude toward music of both educators and readers, this kind of missionary work is after all no more and no other than that which the modern librarian, especially in America, is often called upon to do. I am a believer in the mission of music. The public library can do no more helpful thing to our modern life than to assist the public to understand and love it. The fact that it is not a representative art makes it all the more valuable as a means of detaching the mind from the things of this earth and transporting it to a separate world. A beautiful picture, or statue, or poem is anchored to the ground by the necessary associations of its subject matter. Music has no such anchor. It is free to soar, and soar it does, bearing with it the listening soul into regions that have no relations with the things of everyday life. It may rest, or it may stimulate. It may gladden or depress, but it does so by means of its own, not by reminding us of the stimulating or depressing things of our own past experience. In the multifarious mission of the public library, as we Americans see it, surely the popularization of good music is to assume no unimportant place. End of section 33.